Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Character Clinic. I'm Haley,
And I'm Karla.
and we are licensed therapists who talk about mental health through the lens of our most relatable fictional characters and ways that we might work with them.
Today we are going to be doing an episode on a movie that's not out yet, but I'm really excited to do this specific movie because it's about something that's very near and dear to my heart. The movie is called Exposure, and it's about people with OCD. And that's my specialty. So I'm really excited to be doing this movie. We actually got the chance to watch it before it's come out. And me and Haley watched it together. It was really fun to watch, and it was a really good movie.
We were so thrilled to see an actual representation of OCD in a movie like this. First of all, just because it's always fun to watch a psychological thriller. Like, they're really enjoyable, really fun. One of my favorite types of movies. But most media portrayals of OCD fall quite short. And so it's such an amazing experience to watch a movie created by someone with lived experience who can actually show a real experience of this and for us to be able to talk about it.
It was really nice to see a good representation of OCD and also what can happen when it goes untreated.
Yeah, and as someone that I don't work with OCD directly as frequently as you do, not nearly because it's not my specialty. But as someone that, it does come up occasionally with my clients, but then also as someone that teaches psychology classes, I'm so excited to be able to share this movie with my students for them to get an accurate depiction of what it can look like if they're completely unfamiliar. It's something that can influence your whole life. And so if you do know somebody who's living with it, then understanding a little bit more about what it feels like, what someone is going through could have a huge impact. So I'm really appreciative of media finally having better representation of these kinds of things.
And overall, it was just a really good movie. As we were watching it, there were times where I was like, "No, don't, no, don't do that." As someone with OCD and as a specialist, I thought it was amazing. I thought it was a great movie. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited for all of you to get to watch it. Something that's really exciting, and it's a little bit different from the other episodes that we've done, is that in this episode, we are actually going to be doing an interview with the creator of this movie, and we are going to get to ask him some questions. So we've never done that before, and we're definitely excited to get a chance to do that.
Yes. And I will say that as of today is February 25th, 2024. And as of today, the movie is not out. Because of that, unlike our usual episodes, we're going to be keeping this as spoiler free as possible so that if you want to see this movie, but also want to listen to this episode talking about it, it should not spoil your experience. So there is that. That is a bit of a deviation from how we typically talk about them for that purpose. And what's really fun about that is I'm excited to ask him several questions about choices that are revealed later on in the movie that we certainly could not put in this episode, but maybe we could have a little mini-sode released later on, with long enough time after the movie has been released, where we are able to show some of this. That could be fun.
I'm really excited about it too. I'm really looking forward to it. A little nervous too, just because it's going to be our first time to interview someone on the pod.
Yes, and hopefully that becomes a thing that we can do on a somewhat regular basis. That could be really, really cool. Bring in some like special guests and experts in various other topics.
Mhm.
We have some planned. And yeah, I think that'll be really cool. So we're going to go ahead and get the intake process started. Karla's going to be our counselor, as she should, with her OCD specialty. I'm going to be the main character. Now, this is a little bit different from how we've been doing our episodes in the past, where it's a big mystery and we have a little bit of a reveal over which character from the media source that we're talking about. This time, because of this movie being focused on OCD, being focused on one specific character, living with it, then of course we're going to choose that character. So this will be through the main character of Exposure. But again, remember, we will be doing our object best. That's not a phrase. Is it abject best? Anyway, we're going to be doing our
Abject best.
best. Abject best. We're going to be doing our abject best to make sure that it's spoiler free.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started. What brings you into counseling today?
I've been having a hard time lately, and it's kind of started to impact everything: work, my home, my relationship with my wife. We were once talking about like having kids, and now it's starting to look like that might not be a great idea right now. And I just don't want to keep. Well, she really needs me to work on this, and so she found me this group of people that do some weird stuff, to be honest. But they said I needed to also be coming here one on one, so I'm doing it for her.
Yeah. So it sounds like your relationship and your life in general has been really impacted, and you're at a point where you need to do something about it. It also sounds like you've been led toward a group of people that might help, and you're looking to see me individually in addition to that.
Yeah, if that's what's going to help. This group doesn't seem like it's really related to what I need. Like I've had some severe trauma, and everything I do is focused on helping prevent that happen again.
Mhm.
And the group seems to be about other stuff. So I don't even know if any of this is the right fit. I don't even know if it can be helped because we can't undo what happened, but I
Mhm.
can try to prevent it from happening again.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm able to come up with enough stuff that can be done.
Okay. So, tell me a little bit about this trauma. When did it happen? Tell me a little more.
It was a while ago. I don't know how much I can really talk about it, to be honest. I feel like that just sends me into this hang on. I have to go. I have to go get a different one. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Oof. Sealed.
Well, what can you tell me a little bit more about what just happened? Does that happen frequently?
This is what happened frequently.
Switching water bottles?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really important to check to make sure that the one I'm going to drink from is not contaminated. Um, these reusable water bottles, I'm sure they're great, but I just there's no way to know if it's really clean, and like anyone could get into it. And
Mhm.
if the guy, let's just say, if certain people were to find me,
Mhm.
then they would have total access to be able to poison my open food, my open water, and so I always have to look. And my wife doesn't believe me, but I swear sometimes there's white residue in these water bottles, and God knows what that is. And it's not safe to drink from. So if I find something that's totally sealed and I drink from like a clean, brand new sealed water bottle, then like that is safer.
Yeah. So, what I'm hearing you say is that you feel like you need to make sure, 100% sure, that there's nothing that could potentially contaminate your water.
Right. You have to be safe. You have to be careful. You have to get that reassurance. Like you could never know what could happen.
I see. And how often do you have to do this? Do you think about it all the time?
Well, yeah. I mean, this is something that's happened to me before. So you have to be really aware. You have to be thinking about it. You have to be watching out for it. You have to be aware at all times or you might not be safe.
I see. Yeah. So you're worried that your water could get poisoned. And in order to prevent that from happening, or start over, you're worried that something could happen to your water and that then something could happen to you. And go ahead.
I know something could happen to my water. So absolutely. I've lived it. So I know that it can easily happen again if I'm not extra careful and vigilant.
Hmm.
Any time I have to eat or drink anything, it's there. Lately, it's been a little bit more than that. Sometimes I have to leave work early and go check on my house. And sometimes I have to put in extra safety measures in the house and started skipping work. It started making my wife really concerned. My doctor
Yeah.
doesn't really like to listen to me about it either, but I know.
Yeah. I see. So do you feel like your life has started to revolve around making sure that you're safe?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned having to leave work, having to check on your house. You mentioned it's affected your family, and you even mentioned your doctor too. So it
I go
sounds
there
like
a
it's
lot.
been Tell me more about that.
Um, I try to go to this doctor a lot. He's getting actively annoyed at seeing me. He just tells me the same thing every time, which I guess he'll be happy that I finally took his advice and came here. But yeah, it's been a lot.
Mhm. Yeah. So it sounds like you've already had a referral in the past to come to a OCD specialist?
Every time I go ask my doctor about symptoms I'm having that might be related to like drinking contaminated water or eating contaminated food, he's just like, "Oh yeah, your gums are sensitive. Here's a therapist to go to." And he just brushes me off.
Yeah. So you feel like he doesn't take you seriously?
Yeah.
He doesn't see it as serious as at it as you feel like it really is?
Yeah, he thinks it's like all in my head. And so he wants me to just talk to someone about it instead of
Mhm.
helping me get some like medication or something. Like that would help clear out any poison I might have ingested.
Yeah. So it sounds like this doctor has a different take on what's going on than you do.
Yeah.
Okay. There are certain things that I noticed that really fit with something called obsessive compulsive disorder. Have you ever heard of obsessive compulsive disorder?
Yeah, the group that my wife brought me to, like they talk about it being about intrusive obsessions, but I always thought OCD was like you just like things clean.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've never really associated it with yourself because it's not how you've seen it depicted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, would you be okay with me giving you a little bit of explanation on, or a little bit of information on how OCD can look using an example that you've given me today?
Okay.
Okay. So I really like to do this with people using something called the OCD cycle. So, and I'll do that with you today. So think about it kind of like a cycle. And at the top, there is a situation. So let's say, or a trigger. Let's say that maybe a trigger might be seeing a water bottle that's not fully sealed. And the person might see that and then have a thought, so think about the trigger and then a thought. They have a thought like, what if it's poison? Or what if it's contaminated? And that thought just, what happens is that it triggers a feeling of anxiety or a feeling of discomfort. And the person feels really anxious and really uncomfortable. And they feel like, I just need to make sure that it's not poison or that I'm going to be okay. And so they'll do something called a compulsion. And a compulsion is something that the person is doing to make their anxiety go away and to get rid of the thoughts. Compulsions could be something like, you know what? I'm just going to throw this bottle away, throw it away, wash my hands, and then I'm going to grab a new one and I'm going to make sure that I get one that is sealed. And so they feel better. Like, oh, okay, I didn't drink that other one. I am just going to drink this one that's sealed and things are good. The issue is that they feel relief. So we talked about that relief, but that relief is really, it's short term. So you might feel relief for a day, maybe even longer than a day sometimes. But the more you go through the cycle, the shorter the relief is. So what ends up happening is that the next time that there's a trigger, so the next time that you see an open water bottle, or the next time that maybe you weren't sure that the water bottle was sealed or not, the same cycle starts all over again. Obsessive thoughts, having to feel or feeling anxious, having to then do something to make that anxiety go away, and then the relief. But the other kicker here is that a lot of times it starts to get worse and worse and faster and faster. So then maybe the next time, even if the water bottle was sealed, sometimes people might think to themselves, well, what if somebody somehow like injected poison into this water bottle, even though it was sealed? And then they have to go through the cycle again. So then maybe instead of checking to make sure that the water's sealed, they'll like squeeze the water bottle to make sure that there's no holes in it where any water could come out of.
It's a good
And
idea.
it might feel like a good idea, But the issue here is that you feel relief, but then the relief starts to be shorter and shorter until you get to a point where you no longer actually feel any relief. I'm curious if you've noticed yourself having this experience of the cycle.
I mean, I haven't thought of the squeezing it idea before, but other than that, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of what happens.
Okay. Are there other things that you do to make sure that you're not poisoned, to make sure that you're safe?
If there's any opened food, like it was not sealed right before I got it, then I won't eat it. I throw out waters. I've been adding like security systems onto my house. I don't know. Sometimes the only thing that makes me feel any better is just thinking about it a lot. Just in my head of like, I know I'm doing everything I can to keep it safe. I know that this is how I can be safe and just really focusing on how I can be safe.
Those are actually called mental compulsions. So a lot of people don't see them as compulsions because it's just rumination, it's just thinking. But there's a difference between having a thought and then actively thinking. So that initial thought is just a thought that came up, like, what if my water's poisoned? But then everything that comes after that tends to be the compulsion. So for some people, they try to figure it out in their mind. So maybe they're like, well, there's no way it could have been poisoned because there's no holes in it and it's sealed. Whew, okay, I feel better. Other people might try to reassure themselves. They might think something like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. It's not poisoned, it's not poisoned. And that helps them feel better. But all of these things are happening mentally. And so maybe your loved ones can't see it, and you might not have realized that that was compulsive.
The thing you said about maybe your loved ones can't see it, that seems closer to my experience. I kind of feel sometimes like I'm the only one that is aware of how risky the situation is. And sometimes it feels like people just don't believe me, they don't care as much, and they're very bothered by me focusing a lot on this.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I don't know, I guess it does sound kind of familiar.
Are you, like, fully worried that you might get poisoned? Or do you
Yeah.
feel like, "Oh, yeah,
What was the other one though?
yeah." Well, there are times when people feel like, "I need to make sure that I'm not getting poisoned, but I know I'm not, but I just need to make sure."
Sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other.
Mm, okay.
It's definitely always some kind of like, I just need to make sure though. I just
Mhm.
need to be certain. I just need to, like, there's nothing I can do that there's no length too far to make sure I'm safe.
That's the most important thing is knowing 100% for sure that you're gonna be safe.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm wondering, the type of therapy that we do for OCD is it's something called exposure and response prevention. So what that means is that, and it's one of the best treatments for OCD. What we do in ERP is that on purpose expose you to some of your triggers in order to activate the obsessive thoughts, and we help you respond in a different way than how you've been responding. So, without doing the compulsions. It might sound scary, but in this type of treatment, discomfort is the point.
It kind of sounds like what this group is trying to do. Like, the leader also talks about exposures, and I've seen some weird things that they try to make themselves do that are scary. But I haven't heard about that second part of it.
Yeah. What do you mean? Which second part?
So I've only heard so far them talk about exposures. I haven't heard about any of the rest of that.
I see. Okay. So with exposures, we want to make sure to not just do exposures without doing the second part, which is called response prevention. So changing the way that you respond, because if you're only doing the exposure part, then you're still doing the same thing that you were doing before. And so that can just make it worse. What we do in ERP therapy is, I'll give you a quick example. Let's say that I have you hold a water bottle that is open. And what you might usually do is want to throw it away, want to wash your hands to make sure that there's no kind of residue on your hands or anything like that. But what I would have you do is to just hold it and then notice the anxiety that comes up for you. And the point is that we watch your anxiety go up, and as your anxiety goes up and as your anxiety stays there, you're not doing anything to make it go away. Again, discomfort's the point. So you're not doing anything to make it go away. Eventually your brain starts to learn that I can tolerate this amount of anxiety and discomfort, and it stops bothering you as much. And so then the thoughts stop bothering you as much.
Okay. That sounds terrifying, but it also kind of sounds maybe a little different than what I was thinking about maybe trying some of the exposures on my own, but I wasn't aware of that second part of that, so maybe that wouldn't have been a good idea.
Yeah, I would recommend just waiting. So what I would do is we would focus on some psychoeducation. So just gaining a better understanding of OCD, what it looks like for you specifically, what your compulsions are, why compulsions are not effective, and what is effective. And then once we've done that, and once we've created something that we call an exposure hierarchy, which it sounds like you've maybe been doing some, or you've been thinking about doing some exposure. So you might have heard a little bit about this, not sure. But once we've done all of that, then we can start doing exposures, and we will need to make sure that we're doing them the way that's effective. So what that means is that we would be doing them together at first, and then you would go off and do them on your own as homework.
Okay. So there's definitely a wrong way to do this.
Yes,
Okay. And anything that just makes me feel more comfortable in the moment that's not helping?
exactly. Yeah, it sounds like you're catching on really quickly.
Okay. I'm trying to do this for my wife, so I'm willing to try anything.
I just want to say that you're really brave for trying this, because I know that facing your fears head on is not easy.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can say that again.
Yeah. So that's going to be it for today. Do you have any questions before we finish today?
Is it okay that I keep going to this group? Can this be done in a group setting?
I think that getting support is important. Being around people that can understand is important. And at the same time, I wouldn't recommend doing an exposure group with someone who's not licensed. So I might recommend against it for now. But again, doing some sort of support group can be helpful, but we can definitely talk about more resources in our next session.
Okay.
That'll be it for today, and I will see you next week.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll drink this
So
actual water bottle.
Haley, what did you think?
I thought that went great. I think that was one of our more really successful and effective intake examples. I think we went into that one with very specific goals, and I think we achieved them and more. I think that was a fantastic bit of psychoeducation that we were able to provide for anyone that might be listening to this to just understand more about what this is and how it works. So I am super proud of that. And then I think it still gave a great insight into the movie without, without spoiling anything. Yeah, I think it went really well.
I think so too. I feel like specifically with ERP and with people who come in who have OCD, I always think it's important, if possible, to give them some psychoeducation in that first session, just because it can be helpful to see how this fits into OCD. Because a lot of times there are people who just don't necessarily believe that it's OCD, and it can just be helpful to see it portrayed in that way.
Yeah, especially when it comes to like misunderstandings that even people familiar with this field can have. Like you have been, since we watched this movie, you've been explaining to me certain types of things that can actually be compulsions that people might not be aware count as compulsions. And so being able to explain that, being able to explain to someone how these things fit within this paradigm is really, really helpful. And I actually also really like that about the movie, that it depicts certain types of compulsions that maybe aren't the most commonly expected. And it doesn't depict ones that are more commonly expected. So it helps create this idea that like maybe there's more to it than you previously thought.
Yes, and I'm actually so excited. I'm glad you brought that up because I'm so excited for people to watch the movie because there are certain scenes, and that made me really happy to see because I imagine that people who watch the movie might feel like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that that was could also be OCD, and it might just help bring awareness.
Yeah, and it might, I'm so sorry if you're listening to this and I'm about to call you out, but it might also help people be a little bit less likely to like wipe something off and make some kind of joke of like, "Ah, I'm so OCD, I really like things clean." When if that's it, that has nothing
Mhm.
to do with it.
That's exactly right. So I always like to explain to people, if you like cleaning, if you let's say that you're cleaning your house and you're having a good time and you can stop whenever you want to stop, that's not OCD.
Yeah.
With OCD, you feel like you have to do it and you cannot stop until either you've done it perfectly or until you feel just right. And so it's not the same. So if you like cleaning, cool, but it's probably not OCD. So, Haley, with this client, what would you do?
Well, first and foremost, right now, the first thing I do is, like you said about the psychoeducation, but recognizing if I'm the clinician for this client and I'm recognizing this sounds like OCD, first thing I'd be doing is referring to someone like you because I do not have the specific training in ERP or OCD. I usually, if I'm working with OCD, it's usually after the fact. It's usually someone has completed their ERP and they're just dealing with lingering anxiety, and I know just enough to be able to help prevent some resurgence, that kind of a thing. I know enough to not necessarily add on extra harm if it's to come up again, but I would absolutely prefer, at least right now, I'm definitely open to getting some specific ERP training because it comes up a lot more than you would expect. But right now, I'd be referring out to someone like you. So then I would turn the question on you. And I know we actually already talked about it a little bit, but
Mhm.
what would your plan for this client be?
Yeah. And thank you for recognizing that. So, what I would do with Tanner is start by giving him psychoeducation, start by teaching him about OCD, the obsessions, compulsions, the cycle, help him get a good understanding of it. I would want for us to do some assessment to better understand all of the obsessions and then all of the compulsions. Because what tends to happen is that there's usually not just one theme, it can jump around a lot. And so I'd want to know what all of those are and then move into actually doing the exposures. And then from there, we would just focus on exposure and response prevention treatment until we graduate. And so this treatment is meant to be pretty short term. It's not a type of treatment where you're just going to be in it forever. We want you to learn the tools, learn how to do it, learn how to do it properly. And then once you're in a much better place, once you've gone through your hierarchy, the point is to kind of be able to do it on your own. And the hope is that by that point you have learned that you can sit with discomfort. For me, that's what treatment would look like. There is the treatment called inference-based CBT or ICBT is a treatment that a lot of clinicians are starting to learn more about. I think it's used more outside of the US, but a lot of clinicians here in the US are starting to use it more. And it's a modality that I really want to learn because the obsessions are the focus. So, obsessional doubt is the focus, and you don't have to do formal exposures. Whereas with ERP, the compulsions and stopping the compulsions and doing exposures, that's kind of what the focus is. So, yeah, that's how I would work with Tanner.
Sounds like a plan. It sounds like in this particular route, if this were able to be the path that he took, then he'd be in great hands.
Oh, I hope so. And I'm very so with this one, I'm very thorough because this is my specialty. So
Hmm.
it's a lot easier for me to be very specific about what would happen with treatment here. And therapy for OCD, specifically ERP, is very different in that it is very directive. So it is a very different form of therapy than some other forms of therapy.
Yeah, which is why I'm not actually contributing very much to the suggestions and the goals for this client because it's quite different from the modalities that I tend to focus on, quite different from the population that I tend to see. And I can do not much else but echo exactly what Karla said because I would likely be needing to refer him out with the level of severity that he's experiencing and the low level of insight that he has into what's going on. Um, and he would definitely need someone who is very specially trained in this. So this would be the biggest help.
You mentioned that I would be open to getting some sort of training in ERP. And if for clinicians who, and I guess this is a message for clinicians who would want to continue working with a client that has OCD, I would really urge you to look into some sort of ERP training or even ICB.
I do think I will explore some of these additional modalities. It's always fun to gain additional trainings and to just, I just keep wanting to collect them. I just keep wanting to get more and more different modalities. I see a lot more populations in my caseload than you do. And so a lot of different things come up. And I definitely want to feel prepared.
Yeah, and I would say if you were open to getting ERP training, kiddos need people who know ERP because there's not a lot of specialists. So there's already not a lot of us as OCD specialists. There's even less people who specialize in pediatric OCD.
That's a great point. I do see a lot of children and teenagers. Yeah, we'll have to keep that in mind. I'll keep y'all posted.
Peter, welcome to Character Clinic. So this is Peter Cannon, and we're really excited to have Peter with us because Peter is actually the creator of Exposure Move. We're really excited to have you with us, Peter.
Thank you so much. I love your podcast and the episodes that I've heard, so it was really exciting to get to be on here.
We are both huge fans of the movies. We actually decided to watch it together. So really, we have to watch it together. Being a OCD specialist, I knew I was going to be like, pause, Haley, he should not be doing that. Or that therapist, that should not be doing that. Like, no, that's making things worse. So I thought everything was depicted really well. Peter, tell us a little bit more about why you created Exposure Movie.
Yeah, so I have dealt with OCD personally for 12 years at this point. At least that's when the diagnosis happened. The general knowledge of what OCD is better than it was 5 years ago and better than it was 10 years ago. It's not all the way there. It's not all the way there because I still go online and I outside these spaces that a lot of these folks with OCD have kind of found themselves in on the internet. The people out there kind of happen upon something, an obsession in the wild, and they react to it very poorly or aggressively or mockingly or any laundry list of things, and folks' understanding of what OCD is still kind of limited. And I hadn't seen a whole lot of movies that showed it in the way that I suspect other people experience it, which is kind of waking nightmare. And I felt as though that I could kind of contribute to the media landscape that some shows and movies take it more lightly. They which is a good thing too, by the way. Like, why go through all this if you can't even laugh at yourself? But I wanted to show it kind of in the psychological thriller aspects. Number one, because I'm more of a thriller writer. And number two, I felt like I hadn't seen that experience yet.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We definitely noticed that the depiction was very different than any depiction I've seen in any other form of media. And I've seen a couple that are less than desirable and some that try, but we were definitely blown away by just how representative this depiction was. And how, I think to your point earlier as well, that not only does the general public maybe not quite know a whole lot about it, but also there were things that we talked about that even mental health professionals are still unaware of, like nuances of rarer subtypes of OCD that, or especially when it comes to mental compulsions is one of the ones we were talking about a lot, that might not be very visible as OCD to someone who's not specifically trained in it.
Yeah, no, I am glad that we're sort of moving to a broader understanding, but it's still kind of slow. And mental compulsions are something that it's a big umbrella term that we can also throw words like avoidance and reassurance and other words like that in there. Once you kind of label them, they become a lot more apparent, at least in my experience.
So, something that Karla and I have been noticing this just in watching the movie, but then also just hearing you talk about it and using words that Karla has been using to teach me about some of the things that she knows. I'm really blown away by your level of expertise on this topic. Have you spent a lot of time really researching it?
Yes, I wanted with the points I'm trying to make with the movie, I would like to say that I did do my due diligence in terms of finding okay, is there really a connection between trauma and OCD? Is there really a comorbidity between drug abuse and OCD? And can one follow the other? Like, can I find real examples of this in the wild? And then after all that, because, you know, as much as I want to believe that my own experiences, personal experiences, anecdotal experiences can be kind of related to, you can't be sure when you're writing some things and you're writing about a condition that like 1% of the population has, you know, to varying degrees. So you really want to make sure that you're showing it as right as you can, especially if like this is the OCD movie, you know? So I hired a therapist to look over the script, being like, listen, like if anything, not my therapist,
Mhm.
conflict of interest.
Yeah.
But I hired like this therapist sort of does the whole like TV film, like whenever they want to represent something, she'll come in, she'll read the script, you go, okay, you can get away with this. This is very strong. I'd take another look at this. Thankfully, there wasn't much to change, or at least from her perspective. And then we went into production, and yeah, I keep saying on the Instagram and on social media, like this is a movie first, you know? This isn't edutainment, you know? This isn't a documentary, this isn't the DSM-5, whatever. My primary course of action is to tell a good story and
Mhm.
have people walk away wondering about OCD. And then maybe
Yeah.
doing that research on the side themselves, because this movie isn't research. This movie's a story, you know?
That's actually something that Haley and I had talked about that we really appreciated about the movie is that it was a movie and we didn't feel like someone was just trying to educate us about OCD. It didn't
There
feel corny. It didn't feel like someone was just, like you said, throwing the DSM at us.
That's my biggest fear, by the way, in, in writing. Like one executive once told me, nobody likes to be fed medicine, and I really don't want this movie to be a chore for people, you know? So in that vein, the story and characters come first, and I hope that the elements of OCD that I showed in the film were not detracted from, or one did not detract from the other between the OCD representation and then the story and characters. I hope. That's my hope.
I found it incredibly entertaining, just fun to watch, and definitely, like I mentioned about us, like guessing about plot twists or things like that. We were very invested in where's this going to go, what's going to happen, and we were talking about OCD as we were watching the movie and talking about it, but it was a lot more about like the character and what the character's going through and what the group is going through as
Mhm.
opposed to specific clinical notes over whether or not this meets criteria. It was a lot more about like who the character is as a person, just like you hope when you're watching a movie. Another thing that really came up in the movie was also the experience of loved ones and how they are affected by their loved one with with OCD, or also the way that they influence their loved one. Could you speak a little to that?
So, between two people in a long term relationship, if one has some kind of ongoing problem like mental illness or addiction of some kind or chronic pain or any kind of ongoing thing that maybe isn't anybody's fault, that's something that still needs to be addressed and there's still work to be done. You can't just say, sorry, we got into that shouting match. I've been really depressed. Just because someone's going through something ongoing and terrible doesn't mean that the other person doesn't exist. And that's just something that I feel like needs to get across in media more, because I feel as though it is one of the bigger side effects of ongoing problems or ongoing conditions is that it really wears down your loved ones, and it really tests. It really tests the strength of their energy and their sort of emotional stamina.
Absolutely. And we were able to see how that dynamic was shaped in the movie.
It's not the most fun topic, but I will say that is beyond OCD. I would say that might be one of the more relatable ones. You know,
Mhm.
just how much someone can where someone's limit is,
Yeah.
and no one particularly likes to talk about that limit exists.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Well,
that makes a lot of sense. It's really hard to recognize exactly how much a person can take in terms of how much support they can offer. But then, additionally, kind of another side of that is there are certain instances where it can be really concerning if loved ones start to only enable. And for the specific example of OCD, maybe really focusing a lot on reassurance, which, as you've mentioned, can be part of those mental compulsions and can potentially even make it worse.
And the ironic part of that, as you two very well know, is that the person in said relationship thinks that oh, this is my job, just to be there and
Mhm.
support and reassure, because that's what you do when your significant other is hurting, or when your family member or friend is hurting, like I can step in and I can do this job, and they don't know that they're feeding into a cycle that will ultimately make the disorder more symptomatic and worse. And it's really tragic, and kind of ironic. That's one of the main themes of kind of, again, not too much in this realm of spoilers, but it is kind of one of the main themes of the movie. And I can't speak to how often this happens, but sometimes it kind of forms a sort of a caretakey role. And this caretaker role feels as though they shoulder all this burden. And there's this kind of dual feeling of resentment for the other partner, but also at the same time responsibility for propping said partner up. And yeah, that doesn't sound so healthy.
Like, this constantly being pulled between, I wanna help, but also this is getting to be too much, and it just really has a big influence on that dynamic, like you mentioned.
I see that sometimes in therapy where family members have a hard time knowing what to do, but also feeling frustrated that I have to keep doing this. And at the end of the day, I always have to explain to people that it is a mental health condition, but it's also not your responsibility. It's still something that's on them to work on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even signing up for therapy is not does not absolve you of the work that you have to do. You have to literally take those uncomfortable steps, lift the responsibility off of other people, and exist with this uncertainty. And I loved how I loved how in the episode that you guys did, you slipped discomfort's the point in there. That was fun. I like that.
I think, Haley, you said that you've used it since then.
Yes, I've genuinely used it with clients. I've added in uncertainty, but I would say, like, yeah, uncertainty and discomfort are the point. I've literally stolen it.
Oh man, that's so wonderful. I'm just glad there's a lot of folks that worked on this movie that would be really happy to hear that it's not out yet, and that it's resonating. And our cast was phenomenal, and they took giant chances on this movie because they didn't know
Mhm.
me, none of them knew my team, but they came on anyway, and they gave it all they got, and it shows in the movie, and I'm just so grateful for them.
I will definitely say I was very impressed by the performances. Was
Yeah.
there anything else that you would really love to be able to share with maybe our audience or audiences in general?
The one thing I guess I want to ask everybody is if this is something that you want to see, it really helps me on my end if you either like post publicly about it or tell your friends or just generate really any buzz that you can. I've been so thankful that the mental health professionals that I've shown it to so far have reacted really positively to this. And that's been huge. And that's been a big reason I've been able to get it out there. But the more people get on board, say, hey, this movie looks really good, I want to see this movie, distributors see that. And they're like,
Mhm.
okay, let's knock this up to the top of our list. Let's try and get this out. Word of mouth is huge.
Well, I love the idea
No.
that someone could listen to this episode later on after the movie is like out, and them being able to reminisce about, like, remember when it was not yet out and everyone was pushing for it? That'd be kind of cool.
remember when he just kept posting pictures with text on it for like a year? Yes. Remember that? And we were like, hey, when can we see this thing? And then the director was like, I don't know.
Exactly. And then maybe we'll be able to revisit it and do an episode that's not spoiler free that highlights a different character. That
Yes,
could be
I
cool
would
to
love
do.
that too. That would be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
All right.
we've
Well,
talked about that a lot, actually, doing a different character.
do you have anything else that you wanted to bring up, Karla?
Yes, I do have a question for you. And this question is a little bit more personal, so feel free to answer it or not. But I'm curious about your experience with therapists in general. The pre-diagnosis, post-diagnosis, what has that been like for you?
I have been very lucky. I have been luckier than other people. Pretty early on, I got in touch with an OCD therapist, like in high school. Now,
Mhm.
there were high school counselors that were also very good and I got very lucky with, but they just weren't equipped for this kind of
Yeah.
treatment. But to my benefit, they were like, okay, I see this. I might be vaguely aware of what you might be dealing with, but I know that I don't necessarily have the tools to help you out with this. Here's the name of somebody else. Like that's a lot of therapists don't feel, again, I've personally been very lucky, but anecdotally from other people, I've become aware that a lot of therapists don't feel as if they can do that, that they can say, hey, I just don't have the tools to do this in whatever intake session that they're doing. Yeah, so I don't know if you all have heard similarly or not similarly, but sometimes it seems like some therapists want to tackle it and use what training they have when ERP is kind of a specialized thing, or ACT, or whatever the modality is.
The reason I ask is I have seen a lot of times therapists try to tackle it using their own modality of choice, and it just not going well. And a lot of people go years and years without proper treatment. And sometimes the best thing that therapists can do is just, I don't have the tools for this. And I would like to refer you to someone else so that you can get the treatment. Well, I think we're out of questions. Haley, do you have any other questions?
I have some questions for after you hit that stop button.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming on our podcast, and we are really excited for the movie to be out. I was telling Haley that I am definitely gonna be bringing people over to my house to watch the movie whenever it's out.
Oh man,
I'm very excited for it.
that really means a lot to hear that. It makes me really. This is why I do it. This is why indie filmmakers, especially, that like with any kind of like labor of love, So it really means so much and I'll let like the cast and the producers and the crew know what a wonderful experience this has been. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, that's gonna be it for this episode. So, what do we want to plug today?
Well, we definitely, as usual, want to plug our social medias. So that is the podcast, Instagram, and TikTok. We're also now on Instagram Threads, but it's always
Mhm,
at Character Clinic Pod, and then
mhm.
and YouTube. And then we have our own socials. Karla is, of course, at Karla Pineda OCD on both Instagram and TikTok. I'm on both Instagram and TikTok as Counseling with Haley. But then additionally, we want to plug the movie specifically that we've been talking about today. You can follow them online anywhere as exposure_movie. And if you are interested, they have their trailers posted. You could go watch bits of it. You can learn through their social media a lot about what went into making this movie, which is pretty cool. But definitely, if you're interested in helping make sure that this comes out and gets distributed, then maybe go share it, talk about it, interact with them on social media. It probably would be a big help.
Yeah, and it needs to because it's so good and it's very well made. It's great.
I would unironically assign this to my students in the psychological disorders chapter.
That would be so cool.
I know.
Haley doesn't talk about this that much, but she's a professor. And when we first started to be friends, she would tell me about, like, I try to make sure that my students know that OCD isn't just about cleaning. And I was like, oh my God, thank you. You're doing the work that needs to be done because that's advocacy too. That's so helpful. So,
It's definitely important. There's a lot of misconceptions about psychological disorders out there. I love
yeah, yeah, definitely. Okay, everybody. So that'll be it for this episode, and we will see you in our next episode.